Welcome to this episode of the Sports Detective Podcast Show. My name is James Williams, and today we are talking about the Connor Stallions Michigan Wolverine sign stealing documentary on Netflix. So, in case you guys haven't watched it, Netflix released a documentary titled Sign Stealer, which basically gives us insight into Connor Stallions and to the story of the whole sign stealing scandal that rocked the world of college football last year. So, basically, the purpose of this podcast here today is I am going to give a review and kind of a summary of kind of the key parts that happened in this documentary. I'm going to answer a few unanswered questions that we have at the end, and then I'm going to kind of give you my overall review of the documentary as a whole, because boy, this was a very interesting documentary. So before I get into it, though, I want to remind you guys the shameless plug. Please hit that subscribe button if you like documentary reviews, sports documentary reviews specifically. That is the best way to help this channel grow, and it costs you absolutely $0 to subscribe. So please do that. This is our first documentary review, and if I don't know how many views we're going to get on it, but we get a decent amount of views, a lot of interest in it, we'll do more of them. So without any further ado, let's get started. So basically, this documentary starts out, and kind of the first third of the documentary is us learning who Connor Stallions is, because we didn't necessarily know who this person was. No one knew about him until this whole crazy story broke in the middle of October last year. And we kind of find out a little bit more about Connor Stallions. We learn that he is a Michigan kid born and raised. And at a very early age, Connor Stallions knew what he wanted to do with his life. He knew that he wanted to be a football coach, and not necessarily just a football coach, but he wanted to be a football coach for the University of Michigan. There was even a picture when he was like 7 years old, where I remember when I was 7 years old, and I love sports. I dressed up as like baseball players for Halloween. I dressed up as like Derek Jeter one year. I think I dressed up as Alfonso Soriano one year, and I think I dressed up as A-Rod even one year. Connor Stallions did not dress up as a Michigan football player for Halloween. He dressed up as Bo Schembechler, the longtime Michigan head coach. So a little odd, but still kind of cute. But Connor Stallions then, as he is getting older, realizes that he wants to not just be a football coach, he wants to be a great football coach. And he does some research on, hey, who are the greatest college football coaches or just coaches in general? This is his statistic. I've never looked through like lists of like the greatest coaches ever, but he said 15 of the 20 greatest coaches ever went to military academy schools. He references Coach K, Greg Popovich, Bear Bryant, Bo Schembechler, Woody Hayes, just to name a few. So Connor Stallions says, okay, I will enter the Naval Academy. Connor Stallions enters the Naval Academy. And his very first day, or his first week of being on Navy's campus, he goes to the football offices. He goes to Navy's head coach, and he says, hey, I want to be a student assistant for Navy. So the head coach gets up. He walks over to the defensive coordinator's office, and he says, Coach, this is your new student assistant. And then Connor Stallions asks, and by the way, this is all from Connor Stallions' framing too, which is kind of how a lot of documentaries have come now, especially in sports, where it's from the person that it's about's perspective, which kind of begs you, and we'll get into this later, begs you to wonder kind of like the journalistic aspirations of a lot of these documentaries, which is kind of like a deeper conversation that I don't really want to get into today of like, should we actually call these things documentary? Sorry for that tangent. But basically, Connor Stallions asked the defensive coordinator at Navy, hey, what do you want me to do? The defensive coordinator tells him, hey, we don't have anyone right now trying to decipher other teams, signs on the other side of the field. You can do that. So Connor Stallions, the documentary then pans to his first game being on the sidelines for Navy, which of course is against the Ohio State Buckeyes. And there is a sequence in that game where apparently Connor Stallions says to the defensive coordinator, after trying to watch Ohio State signs for the entire game, notices that, like, hey, he goes to the defense coordinator. He's like, hey, power right. And the defense coordinator is like, what the heck is this 18-year-old on the sideline saying to me? And then it shows the Ohio State play where they do a power right with a quarterback, I believe, is the play that they ran, and then Navy actually ends up stopping it. You kind of, this first 30 minutes, 35 minutes of the documentary, you kind of get into the vibe here that Connor Stallions kind of becomes a sign-stealing savant. And there's a few different parts in the documentary where his parents come in, and his dad specifically gives like some pretty kind of like eye-opening quotes about kind of the type of person that Connor is and kind of how his brain is wired. And there's there's one part early where he says like, hey, Connor has always been a person that where it's like if he focuses on something, he can like, can be like hyper focused on one specific thing for a very long time. And then he also has another quote later where he compares him to Rain Man. So I know Rain Man is a very outdated reference. So Rain Man, if you don't know him, I'm sorry for people. I know my age ranges vary on my audience here, but Rain Man is a movie that came out in 1989. Rain Man, the main character, is Dustin Hoffman, or I guess Rain Man isn't Dustin Hoffman's character, but I'm sorry for that point. It's one of my favorite movies. But basically, Dustin Hoffman is a severely autistic, disabled person that Tom Cruise is like long distance brothers with, and then basically kind of figures out that he has this like gift for numbers. And it's, if you've ever heard like the phrase of like somebody drops like a box of toothpicks on the ground, and then some people can look at it and be like 482 toothpicks. That's Rain Man. And then later in that movie too, they also go to a casino and start counting cards. Anyway, those are kind of descriptors for Connor Stallions. And then Connor Stallions gets into his manifesto a little bit here, where he says that he has a document in his manifesto where he literally went through every NFL draft pick since 2010 and went to where they are from and where their hometowns are, and basically has them all like listed out on a map in a spreadsheet. Kind of the idea of that is obviously it's like, hey, you find out where the biggest pools of talent and what areas of the country have the biggest pools of talent for recruiting wise. So you get into that a little bit here. And then this is probably the most impressive part, where Connor Stallions eventually works his way onto the Michigan staff. He goes to this coaching, seminar or whatever for Michigan coaches, introduces himself, and then eventually over time works himself to being a part of Michigan staff. Basically, when he gets on Michigan staff and starts getting connections there, they're like, okay, like, hey, I did all of the sign stealing stuff at Navy. Do you guys need me to do that here? And they're like, yeah, sure. So Connor Stallions, what he did, and this is probably the most impressive part of this documentary, or kind of interesting part, maybe not impressive, but also impressingly psychotic. Connor Stallions puts his phone on a tripod, puts himself behind like a white background, a white wall, and basically takes pictures of himself, and this is his words, doing over 2,000 possible signs that could be shown up on a sideline on a game day. So it could be something like this, it could be something like this, and basically it's a way that he can can figure out what the other team is doing and make sense of like of a team does like three signs like consecutively back to back to back. And basically Connor Stallions then, how coaches will have like their play sheets, Connor Stallions uses that to make his own sign sheet. And then that's kind of how he takes his sign stealing game a level up at Michigan. And basically the first 35 minutes, I marked this at 35 minutes of this documentary, you're kind of like, all right, I kind of rooting for Connor Stallions a little bit here. I get how like dedicated this guy has dedicated every single moment of his life to becoming a football coach and becoming a Michigan football coach. And then, at that 35-minute mark, the documentary does two things. It starts to make you feel bad for Connor Stallions, and at the same time, it basically turns to a full-blown Michigan propaganda piece. Like every single person that they're interviewing in the documentary, I'd say at least 90% of them are Michigan grads or cover Michigan in a certain way. And basically you start feeling bad for Connor Stallions because it's like, oh my God, he worked his whole life to get to this moment. And then right at that 35-minute mark, they get into the investigation and the allegations and then kind of the fallout for Michigan, basically from October 2023 forward. And then Connor Stallions turns into this guy that like no one basically knew ever. And then he starts getting memed to hell online and is this guy that was like very nondescript, kind of person, couldn't pick him out of a lineup. A guy that can show up on the Central Michigan sideline and no one notices, to one of the most recognizable faces in all of college football and all of sports. Okay. So basically the next part of the documentary gets into the allegations against Michigan, and then it gets into the NCAA's investigation a little bit, and then it takes a turn where Michigan flips it and says, okay, how did people get this information? So let's get into basically the allegations of Connor Stallions here. So basically the allegations are, so for people that don't know, and this rule, the reason that this rule is in place is because basically they said no in-person scouting in college football. So there's two ways that you can scout and decipher signs in college football. You can do what Connor Stallions says he was doing on the sidelines and look over during a game at the other sideline and try and figure it out from there. You can do that, completely legal. You can watch game tape and you can try and decipher it that way. What you cannot do in college football is you cannot have in-person scouting. You cannot have people travel to games and videotape the games trying to decipher people's signs. And that is what Connor Stallions is alleged of doing. There's a lot of records that were discovered of Connor Stallions buying several tickets to several college football games all over the country of opponents that Michigan played or maybe was going to play. So Connor Stallions' argument is this, and they alluded to this a little bit early in the documentary. Connor Stallions' argument is like, hey, man, I'm just a Michigan football fan, and if my friends want to go see games, I'll buy them tickets to go see games. Well, then you do a little bit deeper, and another argument for Connor Stallions is like, hey, man, I bought tickets for my mom, bro. I had tickets for my mom at Purdue. You think my mom was doing in-person scouting for me, my sweet old innocent mother? You going to accuse my mom of that, bro? You going to accuse her of that, bro? Then come to find out that every single ticket that Connor Stallions bought for his friends was at the 50-yard line. They showed like a graphic in the documentary where it's like 50-yard line, 50-yard line, 50-yard line, 50-yard line, all of them, which are pretty expensive tickets. And basically, to kind of summarize the accusations of that, basically, to connect the dots on that is a Michigan booster who they called Uncle T, basically gave the money, this is the theory, gave the money to Connor Stallions. Then Connor Stallions bought the tickets for other people who would go to the games in person and then, record the games. There's another interesting part in this documentary where Connor Stallions, I'm going to get to the Ohio State part of this here in a second too, by the way. There is another part of this documentary that's very fascinating. Two more things with Connor Stallions. One is the Central Michigan thing. The documenter, or the interviewer in the documentary, hands Connor Stallions a picture of what we all know is him on the Michigan sideline, hands it to Connor Stallions, and they ask him, is that you? And Connor Stallions, this is the thing that's kind of the most funny in the documentary. He's a terrible liar. So Connor Stallions gets the picture, and he's like, oh my God, this picture, man, this picture that's been getting sent around online, that dude doesn't even look like me. Doesn't even look like me, bro. I don't even know why people are making that comparison, bro. Me on the Central Michigan sideline, bro. Me. I've never even been to Central Michigan. I'm obviously embellishing that a little bit there, but he's basically like, no, it's not even me. I don't even like the guy doesn't even look like me. And it's like, come on, man. Come on. I bet your parents saw those pictures and were like, yeah, what's Connor doing in Central Michigan? What's he doing? Oh gosh. And then so that was funny. And then they show us, and this is things that from things that I've read, basically Connor Stallions' lawyers okayed this being in the documentary, where the NCAA did question him about all of this stuff in April. And basically they asked him like a question of like, did you pay for other people to go to games, other college football games? And Connor Stallions says, yes, I did. And then they say, did you tell people to, when you paid for their tickets to go to these games, to record signs of the other team or record film? And he's like, no, I did not. And then they ask him, and this is where Connor Stallions gets put into a corner. Did they ever send you film? Did those people ever send you film that you paid to have go to these games? And Connor Stallions is like, I may have received some film. I might have received some film. And Connor Stallions' argument is like, hey, I like college football. I pay for my friends to go to college football games. And basically his biggest argument is like, I'm such a like savant at sign stealing. They can send me that film. I don't need it. That's how good I am at this. He's like, I run this shit like it's hard to walk. Right? So that's Connor Stallions' defense there. But basically he's like, yeah, if you read between the lines, it's like, yeah, they definitely sent me some film. But Connor Stallions is like, hey, I didn't need it. So with that being said, let's get to the Ohio State part of this, because maybe the last third of this part of the documentary turns into, and this is where we get into kind of the defense of Michigan. And this is what I talk about with Michigan propaganda. When I say that, I don't necessarily mean it in a bad way. And this is basically Michigan's two defenses of the sign stealing investigation against them. The first one is basically, yeah, you kind of caught us. We definitely did some shady stuff here. But how did this information get leaked? How did the Washington Post get this information and break this story? Because basically Michigan's probably like, and they're saying this without saying this, but they're like, hey man, we kept this a pretty tight, quiet operation. How did this information get leaked? And basically, and you guys, if you're probably watching this far and do this video, you probably already know this, but basically it's like, hey, Ryan Day with his connections with his brother that has like a private investigating firm. And then there's another connection that I was trying to remember before I started recording, but please fill me in the comments because I can't remember. Ryan Day had some sort of connection, or Ryan Day's brother or somebody with Ohio State had connections to the Washington Post that originally broke the story. I can't remember that. Please fill me in the comments because I can't remember that connection. But basically, Michigan flips on. It's like, hey, what we did, or what you are accusing us of doing, we didn't break the law or anything. Maybe broke some NCAA laws, but we didn't break the law or anything. So you're going to spend all this time and energy focusing on this investigation where we may have done something wrong, may not have done something wrong, but definitely didn't break the law. Who actually did break the law was the person that uncovered this information, the person that hacked into Connor Stallions' computer. Because if they hacked into Connor Stallions' computer and all of his devices, they probably hacked into every single Michigan person's devices. You'd like to think that, right? So that's kind of their thing, is like, hey, they're flipping it on them. It's like, hey, you're going to accuse us of all this stuff. Well, how this information got leaked had to be from something that was done illegally, which in the court of, the law of the United States is, actually breaking the law compared to, at least what Michigan's accusing, compared to, paying people to go in person and record games, right? So that's Michigan's first defense. Their second defense is basically, and we'll get into this a little bit more with unanswered questions, there's another part in the documentary early where Connor Stallions says that basically there's kind of this like underground group of like, analysts and coaches in college football that like every Sunday they like meet and they like share playbooks, they share signs that they learn from other teams. And it's kind of like this thing where it's like, hey, I scratch your back, you scratch my back. It's basically one of those things. And Michigan also kind of their other argument is like, hey, if we'd had the same kind of like investigating that was done on Connor Stallions, what if we flipped that? We're not going to do it because it's obviously illegal. And they really can't do it because, like, again, paying people to do in-person scouting by the rule of the law of the United States, not illegal. By rule of NCAA law, illegal. So you would have to like break into people's computers if you were going to investigate a bunch of other teams. And they're kind of like, hey, if you want to play this game, and if we all did a bunch of different investigating here, we could probably find some stuff on some of these other schools. And that part there, I 100% side with Michigan on. You're telling me that Michigan was the only team that was, going ahead and doing this? You telling me that? Seriously? You really think Michigan's the only team? Do you think Santa Claus is real too? You're telling me with the SEC schools that have had head coaches pay, or not, I don't know if there's a connection with paying for prostitutes, but look up Hugh Freeze prostitutes. I'll just say that, where he called prostitutes like dozens of times. And Hugh Freeze is like, I just called the wrong number, bro. And it's like, you called the wrong number like 50 times? You're telling me that basically how this worked was a booster was paying for people to go to games, in-person scouting, when we have all this money flowing through NIL? The SEC schools, none of them have done this? Come on, son. And that's where I 100% agree with Michigan, is that, yeah, this probably was a thing that was going on all over the country. Now, maybe Michigan did it to a higher degree than everyone else. Maybe they did it a little bit more sloppily where they got caught and Connor Stallions didn't have his Venmo on private. That was another big part of the documentary. So that is where I 100% agree with Michigan on this stuff. Let's get into the unanswered questions. There's a few unanswered questions that we have here from this documentary. And there's a lot, but I'm only going to address a few that I have written down because I'm already going way too long on this. The first one is, Will Michigan get in trouble? Will anybody that was potentially a part of this get in trouble? From my understanding of this, now the NCAA ultimately can kind of do whatever they want, but from my understanding of this, Michigan only gets severely punished if the NCAA can find out that either Sharon Moore or Jim Harbaugh basically funded this or orchestrated this, or even if they knew about this. They knew about a lot of the details of this and okayed this, or even if it was their idea. From what I can tell, there is no evidence of that. That doesn't mean, Ohio State fans, that doesn't mean that they didn't know it. It just means that there is no evidence of it. Again, it's a thing that has to be proven. So that's kind of what I've heard. Basically, I could be wrong, but it's basically if they can't prove that Connor Stallions wasn't just like a rogue agent doing this with a booster or a board member or whatever. If they can't prove that, if that's the only thing they can prove, Michigan is kind of scot-free in this, thing. Well, maybe not scot-free. They might give them recruiting stuff. They might give them, maybe in a year they're bad, they give them a postseason ban or something like that. Or maybe in Michigan's if it would be funny, they're like, they don't make the playoff this year. We will impose a postseason ban or something like that. That's kind of a thing that happens sometimes where schools aren't eligible for a bowl game. And they're like, we are imposing a postseason ban. And it's like, okay. You weren't going to make it this year. It's kind of silly. So that's the first unanswered question. 2, the person that definitely was involved with this, the person that definitely will get punished for this more than anybody, Connor Stallions. Connor Stallions probably ain't coaching in college football again. As long as the NCAA is in charge. I think I mentioned this earlier. That was you're watching the first 20, 25 minutes of this. You're like, can I hire Stallions for my team? This dude is insane. This dude is insane with all the things that he is doing to try and win football games and how he just wants to win football games and he's doing everything possible to do it. Now, again, he did it a little bit too far where he was breaking rules, but that dude ain't ever coaching in college football. But I think that's pretty clear because he's not necessarily being the most cooperative with the NCAA. And, we know, bro. We know you did it. Let's see. What's the other unanswerable questions that I have? Why didn't Connor Stallions rat out the other sign stealers and the other kind of shady people that are a part of these other programs? My best understanding of that is kind of where we're getting to this a little bit earlier. The only way to prove or find the evidence that these guys were at one point doing this is basically to kind of hack their computers and stuff like that. And or to search all their computers. And there's really no reason to do that unless you have cause or if they're breaking the law, right? And if Connor Stallions did come out, let's say he comes out tomorrow and he's like, here is 7 other sign stealers from Ohio State, Penn State, Georgia, Texas, Florida, wherever. All these people are doing the same exact thing I was doing. 1, he would kind of admit guilt on his own that hey, I was doing it. And 2, he could probably get his ass sued off. That would basically be the biggest part of this. He would just get sued to all holy hell, and he'd have a mountain of lawsuits in front of him because he'd basically be doing defamation at that point. And again, no laws are broken, so trying to access the information that these people would have, you would have to have a police warrant or something like that. And the NCAA would have to have a reason, or the NCAA would have to have a reason to go investigate these people's computers. So I think that hopefully that makes sense. Overall, because we're entering about 25 minutes in this video, overall, first documentary review ever, 3 out of 5 stars. I was entertained the entire time. I'm docking at points because it wasn't necessarily a journalistic, pursuit. And like we said, it was definitely Michigan propaganda for a good chunk of this. But I kind of found the thing where it's you found a way as a neutral observer to actually find Connor Stallions a little bit likable. I understand if you're a Big Ten fan or an Ohio State fan, you're probably watching this and you're I want to eat glass rather than watching this. But overall, I found it entertaining. I had multiple times where I laughed out loud at just kind of some of the ridiculousness of it. And I think they did a good job of, reforming, Connor Stallions' image a little bit. So, 3 out of 5 stars. I enjoyed it. If you're watching this video and you haven't watched it, go ahead and watch it. I think it's a really good watch. So again, I understand if you're a Big Ten fan, you'd think differently of me. You see the Iowa State thing behind me. If in Iowa, if there basically if this was flipped on Iowa, and it was a documentary about Iowa, and Iowa won the national championship under these circumstances, I would probably be I probably would have just broken my computer instead of recording this actual video. So thank God I didn't, and thank God we recorded this video, and thank God you got this far in the podcast. I have no idea how the views are going to be for this one. I don't know. I'm going to get like 12 views on this, or I don't know. I'm going to get, over 100 or something like that. So if you enjoyed this video, please help me out. Hit that subscribe button. Hit that like button if you haven't done already. Doing both of those things, especially the subscribe, helps us out tremendously in the algorithm. It is the best way to help small channels like this grow on YouTube. It helps us defeat the algorithm. That is our goal here. We have a lot of videos that have way more views than we have subscribers. So we want to start changing that. So thank you very much for watching this episode of Sports Tech Podcast. Feel free to check out other videos that we have on our channel and leave a comment on what you thought about the documentary or what you thought about, maybe some things that I missed here. So thank you very much for watching. I'll talk to you next time.